So it'd be helpful if I plug that in. Yes. Okay. So we left off with the Boston Tea Party, and it happens in December, mid-December, December 16th, 1773. It takes time for the news to get to England, and it takes time for George III in Parliament to determine how Boston and Massachusetts will be punished. So the news of the punishment it takes some time to get there. It won't arrive until 1774. And what is passed are what are in Britain were called either the repressive acts or the coercive acts. They're mainly directed at Boston and Massachusetts. And the whole premise here is that they're creating a series of laws that are going to be enforced in Boston and Massachusetts until they pay for what? The tea. Very good. They've got to pay for the tea. But the Bostonians are not interested. So here's what happens. The intolerable acts are what the colonists call them. And it's not just in Massachusetts. They call them the intolerable acts throughout the colonies. First, we have the Boston Port Act, which shut down the port of Boston for goods coming in and out. What group of people are you going to upset?
Fishermen.
Fishermen, good. And, well, smugglers are upset always, but I'm looking for merchants, okay? So the merchants are upset with this. They're not going to open the port back up until the tea's paid for. Self-government was limited, town meetings were banned, and they also, yet again, as we've learned before, have their charter revoked. Why is their charter such a big deal to them? It's their form of a what? Good. Let's expand on that. It's like their little what? Well, we're not there yet. We will be. It's like their form of a constitution. Okay? So that gets revoked. Obviously, we know that town meetings and self-government in Massachusetts, especially Boston, is a big deal. So this is offensive. The next one tends to kind of fly under the radar. The Quebec Act of 1774. And the reason that this one is so offensive, if you guys look over at the map, I don't know if you're familiar with the Quebec province, right? But here's what the Quebec Act did. It allowed Catholicism in the province, and it also expanded the province all the way down into the Ohio River Valley. This was like a slap in the face to the colonists because, remember, they're not allowed to settle out there as a result of the proclamation of 1763. So this really infuriated not just the people of Massachusetts, but it upset colonists everywhere. And as we know, like most of our colonists are anti-Catholic, with the exception of one colony. Maryland. Remember, Maryland's a Catholic colony. Well, it's by this period of time, there's more Anglicans in Maryland than there were Catholics. And then finally, the Quartering Act gets a revision. Remember, the Quartering Act had allowed soldiers to move onto colonial property, into barns, into warehouses that were, in commercial centers and turned into barracks. Now, the Quartering Act allows soldiers to move into private homes. And I want you all to realize this will not go anywhere until the war ends. So there are British soldiers taking up residence in colonial homes throughout the war. So this is not going to just be a protest confined to Massachusetts. Even Virginia protested this. Williamsburg, the House of Burgesses enacted a proclamation to provide a day of prayer and fasting in honor of the Bostonians and the citizens of Massachusetts, and also collected money and food to send to Massachusetts. This was so offensive to the royal governor of Virginia, John Murray Dunmore, that Dunmore disbanded the House of Burgesses. This is a real big moment in Virginia history because the House of Burgesses are going to basically say, all right, we got to make moves. We're not going to be able to continue to keep our, keep meeting in Williamsburg. We're going to have to move away. Richmond. Very good. This kind of puts Richmond on the map. I mean, have you guys been to Churchill before? You guys been down there? You know, like Churchill down to Rockets Landing and down to the bottom? That's pretty much Richmond. That was it. That was all like chickens, pigs, cows, like roaming the streets. And then once government moves, Richmond starts to grow. And then once the canal's built, Richmond really starts to grow. So we'll talk more about that later. So the protests were happening all over. I hope that you can see by the look of this map why the Quebec Act would have been so frustrating to the colonists. It dips all the way down into the Ohio River Valley. All right, so good job talking about the postal system earlier and the committees of correspondence. What the colonists decided to do is to develop basically a delegation that will meet in Philadelphia in September of 1774. That delegation will be known as the First Continental Congress. The only colony that didn't send representatives was Georgia. And it has less to do with geography and more to do with politics. Why would Georgia, or why might Georgia, not send delegates? Any ideas? Good. They are loyal, overwhelmingly loyal. Georgia is the last royal colony established out of the 13. It was established in 1733. Okay? Does that mean all Georgians are going to be loyal? No. But they don't send a delegation here. They are not talking independence yet. What they've come up with in this meeting from September to October is a Declaration of Rights. This gets sent to England, and they agree once things happen, once this gets sent to England and we get word back, if nothing has transpired, we're going to meet again in 1775. Well, it's ignored by George III in Parliament. What also comes out of this meeting is that the colonies start to decide to have their own conventions. This is the birth of what will become the Virginia Convention. And that Virginia Convention will be held in Richmond at St. John's Church. And one of the leading people involved in this convention on March 20th, 1775, here at St. John's Church, is Patrick Henry. And for your entire lives, you've heard give me liberty or give me death, right? Since you were probably in the 4th grade. But what you need to know, or I guess I'm going to ask this, why does he give this speech? Does anybody know? He's very mad about a lot. But the one thing that he really wants, he wants to raise a militia force. And it requires a vote. And they narrowly vote this in. And he's going to lead this militia force known as the Hanover Regulars. And on the breast of their uniform is liberty or death. That was inscribed. I bring this up because we're not done with them. We'll talk a little bit more about them momentarily. So, assemblies are meeting all over. Two of the most significant assemblies that meet are Virginia's Assembly and the Massachusetts Assembly. On April 19, 1775, we already know there is a true presence in Boston, right? We already know that Massachusetts has formed their own militia called the Minutemen. They're training. They're getting ready for possible military conflict. To try to end it before it starts, the British are going to lead a military operation out of Boston to march on Concord. Very good. Earlier, they're going to march on Concord. The commander is Colonel Francis Smith. 700 British soldiers are to march to Concord. They have two jobs. They are to empty out the arsenal at Concord that was the main arsenal for the Minutemen, and they are to arrest Sam Adams, John Adams, and John Hancock, because they're going to be basically questioned for treason. So, the Sons of Liberty have figured this out. How many people have ever been asked this question before about the Freedom Trail in Boston? Everybody do that when they went up to Boston. You went up to Boston recently, right? Did you guys go to the North Church, the Old North Church? Okay, so the Old North Church is the end of the Freedom Trail. The Sons of Liberty, they're going to hang one lantern in the top of the church if the British are coming by land. They're going to hang two if they're coming by water. They load up in boats and they cross over. Two lanterns are hung up in the church. Two Sons of Liberty, Paul Revere and William Dawes, take off on horses, alerting everyone that who's coming. They probably said something a little different. They probably said the regulars or the redcoats are coming. It would have been a little weird to say the British are coming because they're all British, right? Who knows? Maybe they said the British are coming, but they probably said the regulars or redcoats are coming. Regular army. Because their guys are militia. They're the Minutemen. So this gives the Minutemen time in the early hours of April 19 to get their act together and form up on Lexington Green. Here comes the army, unloaded from the boats, marching into Lexington Green. We don't know who fires the first shot, but it definitely came from the colonial side. Shots fired into the British detachment, and it becomes known as the shot heard around the world. 8 militiamen are killed. The militiamen, the Minutemen, go into retreat back toward Concord. The Brits march on. They don't accomplish anything. The arsenal's empty. They can't find John Adams. They can't find Sam Adams, and they can't find John Hancock because the three of them are in hiding. As they march back from Concord, this is when things ramp up. The Minutemen use what style of warfare? Guerrilla style warfare. They're hiding behind houses and churches and barns, rocks, trees, and they're picking off British soldiers as they march back. The war is on. Okay? This is an interesting piece of Virginia history to tie into this lesson that rarely gets talked about. Simultaneously, at the very same time all this is going down in Boston, Patrick Henry and the Hanover regulars are marching on Williamsburg to empty out their arsenal so that it doesn't fall into the hands of the crown. They're too late. Lord Dunmore and British Marines have already emptied out the arsenal. We're talking hours that could have led to the revolution beginning in Virginia rather than in Massachusetts. And I think that's interesting. I thought I'd share that with you guys. So, the war is on. On the top left, we have Patrick Henry's Liberty or Death speech. Top right, Paul Revere's Ride. Bottom left, first engagement, Lexington and Concord. And then if you take a look at the map, the blue is Paul Revere's Ride. The red is the British troop movements. First engagement at Lexington, and then the engagement of the British retreat. We're all familiar with the Boston Marathon, right? It's always run on Patriots' Day, April 19th. Where are my Yankees fans? Where are my Red Sox fans? They always play on the 19th. Yeah, so a little bit of Americana for you today. All right. So, British strengths and weaknesses. How am I doing over here? Yes. British strengths and weaknesses. Britain has a heavy advantage on numbers. 7.5 million to 2.5 million Americans. Also, if we were to look at the American census, overwhelmingly, we have a large number of children in America at this time. That's why a lot of young people are going to go into service in this war. So Britain has one of the strongest standing armies on the planet, and they had the strongest navy in the world at this time. They are a bit spread thin, though, because of their colonial ventures elsewhere. This was a strength early on, but starts to fade as the war drags on. George III hires 30,000 Hessians. These are German mercenaries, predominantly from the Hesse-Kassel region. In the early years, they're a problem. But over time, when contracts aren't renewed, a lot of the German Hessians are like, you know what? I think I'm going to go settle in the Ohio River Valley, brew some beer, do my thing, live my life. So a lot of the mercenaries stick around, which I think is interesting. About an estimated 50,000 American loyalists served with the British. Numerous Native American tribes allied with them, but this starts to crumble as the war drags on because colonial sharpshooters start taking out Native American scouts. So the British don't keep all of their Native American allies for the entirety of the war. But this is the war that divides the Iroquois. 4 of the Iroquois tribes will go with the Brits, 2 will go with the Americans. And the end of the war will not be kind to their confederation. It's pretty much ripped apart. It'll come back together, but it's a pretty sad situation. Also, another weakness, Britain is still dealing with Ireland. The last time we talked about Ireland was in the late 1500s and early 1600s. War has not stopped in Ireland. It will rage on into the 19th and 20th centuries. Okay? So this is another issue that has Britain strung out, all right, in terms of their military. Also, a lot of Brits are not super interested in killing their American cousins. That also takes us to Parliament. There are English Whigs like Edmund Burke who don't want this war to happen. And there are Tory Whigs that support people like Lord Frederick North who do want to see the war happen. And as the war drags on and becomes more expensive, the voices on the side of the English Whigs get louder. End the war. Be done with it. A lot of British generals that came over early on were way overconfident. They also treated their loyalist supporters like second-class citizens. And they had very little respect for many of their Native American allies. This creates problems as time moves forward. Another big problem, too, provisions. Provisions are scarce. This becomes a big problem as the war drags on because they're 3,000 miles away from home. Also, a lot of the British armies are super tied to the coast. Doesn't go well when they get into the wilderness. And we're going to learn about that with the Battle of Saratoga. There is one exception. Has anyone ever heard of the Queen's Rangers before? Okay, they were like no joke. Those guys were like out on the frontier, wreaking havoc for the British. So that's kind of a different story. America was massive. I'm glad you guys brought up terrain earlier. That was good. Because this war, guys, if we look over at the map, it's fought in Canada, New England, the Middle Atlantic, and all the way down to the southern border of South Carolina and the northern border of Georgia. It's fought everywhere. It's crazy. It's basically what we would consider multiple theaters of war, which I'll be talking about when we get into West Defense. Patriot disadvantages are many. They lack unity. They lack soldiers. They lack money. They lack supplies. They do not do a very good job. This is a missed opportunity. They could have liberated their slaves and They could have joined the fight, and some do fight on the side of the Americans and do gain their freedom, but Lord Dunmore passes a proclamation in Virginia allowing for the freedom of slaves who fight with the British. So early in the war, a lot of African American slaves end up fighting with the British Army. Only a third of the population was truly patriot. I think this is the one that shocks people the most, because we have like this romanticized sort of thought in our heads that everybody wanted independence. About a third did, and about a third were neutral. Notably, what religious group would not want to fight? Quakers, very good, nice job. And then about a third were loyal. We're going to learn about a very important loyalist, Ben Franklin's son, William. This war totally destroys their relationship. There's a lot of jealousy, not only within the Continental Congress, but also there's a lot of division between the Continental Congress and the Army, because they just can't all see eye to eye. There's also regional jealousy, and like jealousy in the ranks. Like, for example, Benedict Arnold becomes a traitor because he feels like he's been slighted. He hasn't been appropriately promoted. And this creates a really devastating issue as we get into the war. Americans had very little money. Inflation was rampant during the war. It's going to be a hefty debt when we get out of this thing. Lack of military training, at least in the first couple of years. This does improve by the time we get to 1778. Diseases and starvation is an issue. Dysentery was a really big problem. I don't want to get into that after lunch. Also, why do you think a smallpox outbreak's a problem? What's up? Good. That's another problem too. Yeah, very good. Encampments and prison ships spread smallpox like crazy. So Washington did something pretty bold. He had his entire army inoculated at Valley Forge, which was pretty bold. All right. And the American Navy was like ragtag. I mean, without the French Navy, this war would have never been won by the Americans. So on the left, we have German Hessians hired to fight for the Brits. And on the right is Lord John Murray Dunmore, the last royal governor of Virginia, responsible for Dunmore's proclamation. How am I doing over here? Yes. Love it. All right. American patriot advantages. Americans had great leaders like Washington, Jefferson. Washington's commander of the Continental Army. Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence. Ben Franklin, smooth diplomat. What country was he the diplomat to? France. Very good. He's one of the only Americans in Paris with a statue. There's only 3 Americans with statues in Paris, and there they are right there. Washington, Jefferson, and Franklin. Okay. They also had French aid for the first almost 3 years of the war. It was secret or indirect. After 1778, they become a legit ally, which then pulls in, it'll pull in the Spanish and the Dutch as financial backers for the Americans, and it will also lead to Russia becoming neutral. The arrival of French soldier Marquis de Lafayette. At the age of 19, Lafayette comes over and will be promoted to the rank of general. He will become one of our most important military leaders in the entire Continental Army. He's like Washington's right-hand man. Prussian drill master, Baron von Steuben. Old von Steuben, his arrival was very important because he is the guy that trains soldiers at Valley Forge and whips the army into shape and writes the Army drill manual. Any Ferris Bueller fans in the house? Okay. You know the part in Ferris Bueller where he's like at the parade dancing on the float? Yeah. That's the von Steuben parade in Chicago. So you guys can like blow your parents' minds when you're like watching it sometime. You can be like, hey, our family, hey, it's the von Steuben parade. Just saying. Again, little slice of Americana. All right. Patriots use guerrilla-style warfare, have a massive spy network. We're going to talk about that in lesson 6. Continental Army knew the terrain much better than the Brits. Sharpshooters, excellent marksmen. And there's an improved weapons technology that happens before the war starts. And now, a lot of Americans didn't have access to this weapons technology, but sharpshooters did. Most soldiers fought with smoothbore muskets, but sharpshooters had what inside the barrel of their rifle? They have rifled grooves inside. They could hit a target up to 200 yards away. No scopes yet, but rifling was huge. I'm so annoyed that I just gave that away. Another thing that we could consider an advantage here is the ideology of independence, right? They're fighting for a cause. Can the Brits say the same? What are they doing? They're just an occupying force, right? All right, so on the left, Marquis de Lafayette. On the right, Baron von Steuben. Von Steuben is a very interesting character. He actually fell in love with a very strange cuisine in America. He would hire people to round up black snakes, and he would serve black snakes at dinner parties. It's kind of strange. Yeah. So, a little bit about von Steuben. All right. So, that's it for me.